Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and we have an extraordinary guest with us today. Our guest is Gordon Gund, who is the Chairman Emeritus of the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Gordon, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Devin. It's great to be back with you.
Well, thank you. We talked, it's been nearly 3 years since we spoke. You have just stepped down in an orderly, organized, planned process from the role of the active chairman of the foundation, just effective July 1st, right?
That's right. And I was going along with my wife and a handful of others, the co-founder of the Foundation Fighting Blindness back in 1971, so 45 years ago. And I was a senior officer of the foundation for that long. So probably many would say it was time, long overdue. But also I felt it was very important that we get the next generation of leadership in there to take the whole effort over the finish line. We're already providing therapies in the field now that are helping millions of people, slowing or halting their loss of sight, and in some cases restoring it. So we're already delivering on our mission, but I want to finish the job, and the best way to do it, I think, is with younger leadership taking over.
Well, you've had a remarkable career, have had some tremendous experiences, but perhaps it's fair for us to go back to the start of the foundation. What was it that inspired you back in 1971 to start the foundation?
Well, I had lost my eyesight in 1970, finally. I mean, it's a progressive disease, so it first started to manifest itself in the mid-60s. And so shortly after my wife and I were married, I started, even during that time, losing my night vision. And that started closing in from the periphery inward. And then by 1969, that was gone. It went pretty rapidly, but the day vision part of it went even more rapidly in 8 months or so in 1970. And all that time, we had been looking around for places, for research that was being done, for any knowledge about these diseases. There was almost none at that time, and very little knowledge about the retina or about the whole visual process. And very few people doing research on it. We looked all over, couldn't find anything to slow it or halt it. So after I lost my sight in the fall of 1970, shortly after that, my wife and I agreed and sort of committed to each other that we'd do whatever we could to help research come through with therapies and treatments for people with these diseases that would make sure that when they were diagnosed, when anyone in the future was diagnosed with something like I had, like retinitis pigmentosa, that they wouldn't face the frustrating experience we had, and they wouldn't have end up with blindness.
Did you have any sense at the time, back in 1971, that you'd spend 45 years doing this?
No, it's interesting, Devin. I think everybody who was part of that founding group thought, because of what was going on technologically in those days, bearing in mind that we just put a man on the moon just a year and a half before, or 2 years before, we thought you could do anything very quickly with technology and with science. And of course, we didn't know any better. And it's probably a good thing, because I do believe we still would have started it, but maybe not with the same persistence and same certainty that we were going to get results. It did take a lot longer than I think than we thought it would. But of course, science is much more complex than lay people generally think it is. And our whole idea was to build the field of knowledge first. So build a whole the critical mass of knowledge about these diseases, about the retina, and about how sight works. And then you start to see therapies emerge, which is exactly what's happened. It took longer to build the whole critical mass, but it was something we set out to do right away. And we were lucky to have a scientific advisory board that we had in place within a year of when we started that was terrifically helpful. World-class basic scientists and clinical researchers who helped us put together a team and really helped our credibility, so we could attract young investigators into the field, which it definitely was needed. We had to populate the field. And so worked hard at doing that. Then as the knowledge developed, we started moving them off to other sources of funding and brought new people in. So we've been doing that right along and ever since. And this same scientific advisory board's been great in helping us as the real architects of the research program that now is delivering on the mission.
What are some of the other family of diseases besides retinitis pigmentosa that impact the retina in a degenerative way that you research?
Well, the ones that are probably best known, age-related macular degeneration, which is the leading cause of blindness for people over 50 in our country, and affect 9 million people or so, maybe 10 in the US alone, and many times that number around the world. Then there's the juvenile form of macular degeneration. Macular is the central part of the retina where the cones reside. There are two rods, and cones are the photoreceptors that receive the light initially. The rods have more to do with seeing ambient light at night. The cones more about daylight, color, fine vision. So the macular is in the central part of our field of vision, and there's a form called Stargardt disease, named for the fellow who found it. It's the juvenile form of macular degeneration. That's another disease. Then there's a whole series of diseases all under the umbrella called Usher's syndrome, which is both, it's a terrible thing. It's the leading cause of deafness as well as blindness in this country. And these are all inherited diseases, certainly tendencies with AMD. AMD is not directly inheritable, but you inherit the tendency to it. That is age-related macular. But those are just a few. Choroideremia is another. There's cone rod dystrophy. There's a number of, they're all on our website, fightblindness.org. And there is, on the website, there are descriptions not only of those 23 or so categories of diseases that our research is focused on, but there's also some really good understanding of how the science is progressing.
Well, give us an update on that. That really is where I think we need to take this discussion. What's the latest?
Well, when you and I last talked about 3 years ago, we had this is very exciting, a therapy, a gene therapy called normal replacement gene therapy that was still in trial, really in the phase 2 of the trial. So safety had been secured, and it was certain that it would be safe with the phase 1, and then phase 2 was efficacy, and it had just shown that it could have a major impact on restoring sight to people with a severe form of one of these degenerative diseases called Leber's congenital amaurosis, and it affects children and even infants. When they're first born, they're born with sight, with limited sight or no sight, and or go blind early in childhood. That gene therapy had been was being used with first adults for safety, then children and young adults, and since that time, over 100 children have been given that therapy, and they've had significant amounts of their sight restored with it. Very exciting stuff, and wow. Going from having to use canes to being able to play baseball, ride a bike, things that those families and children could never expect before. So very exciting, not only because of what it means for that disease, but it provides a whole platform and not only for inherited diseases of the retina, for all inherited diseases. Suddenly, and we expect, it's been through phase 3 now, tremendous results in front of the FDA. If it's approved, that particular therapy, it'll be the very first gene therapy approved in the United States for any disease. So very exciting to lead the way there, but most of all, as a platform for these other inherited eye diseases that I mentioned, and for any diseases that are genetic. If you think about it, suddenly there will be a demonstrated proof that you can do gene therapy successfully. For a long time, it had a pretty bad rap when there were some instances years ago. You may remember when some efforts with gene therapy did not end well. But this one looks very exciting and will really help propel the field forward. There's also some very good work trials now. We've got more than 20 clinical trials going on, some of them with gene therapy, some with stem cell therapy, normal replacement therapy, or gene replacement therapy, but in this case, it's cell replacement. And now there's also pharmaceutical therapies and some other neurotrophic factors and other things that are really helping. The bionic eye, as you know, is now in the marketplace. What is called Second Sight, the Argus 2, a company called Second Sight. So lots of things going on, and the field's moving very rapidly, much faster now than it was just 3 years ago, with a number of therapies in the marketplace and many more soon to come.
Well, your vision of restoring sight to the blind is being realized. How do you feel after doing this work for 45 years and seeing this process begin?
Well, I'm very excited because it's palpable now. Not only has it begun, but I can really sense, and more importantly than me, the researchers that we have involved on our scientific advisory board and doing the actual research out in the field, which we fund all over the world. So these are not just US born and bred, they're people that are experts in these areas, in the various disciplines that apply all over the world. And they all feel it too. I mean, they're very excited about where it is now. And I look to that much more than my own feeling for confirmation. And it's terrific.
But with respect to your sense of accomplishment, your sense of satisfaction with the progress that's been made, how do you feel today?
Well, I feel great. Thank you. I mean, I won't breathe completely easily and be completely happy about it till all these diseases are resolved. But I feel like we're really well on our way now. When we last talked, we talked about being on the cusp. I think we're well into the stream now on the whole thing of treating and curing these diseases. And so when that time happens, and I hope it'll happen during my lifetime, it certainly will for a lot of these diseases, and hopefully for all of them by then. But it's a great feeling. I feel the time and effort, and my wife, who's been right alongside me with all of this, we both agree that it's been, and a lot of people involved. We can't take credit for all of this at all, but we've been a major part of it, an important part of it, and glad to have been, because it really feels like the lifetime we put into it has really been justified.
Your work has clearly had and is having a dramatic impact on the lives of other people. What is the prognosis for your own vision based on the research you're seeing today?
Well, it's interesting. I'm chuckling about this recently with some friends because we've already, through research we've funded, identified more than 250 disease-causing genes that are in just this category of retinal degenerative disease that we talked about earlier. That's probably 60 to 70% of all the genes, and mine is not amongst them. So my gene is has not even been identified. That's okay with me if we can get the other 99%, because my life is, I've had a great life. I'm having a great life. So that isn't the reason that for decades now, that I've really worked hard at this. It's more to turn something that was not a good thing at the time for my wife and me into something that hopefully will be helpful in the future. So it'd be wonderful if that happens, but I think it's hard to spend much time, or not useful to spend much time thinking about what was or might be. It's really working on what you can have an impact on.
You have had a wonderful life, an exciting life. You, for a time, owned a stake in the Cleveland Cavaliers. Tell us a little bit about how you came to own the Cleveland Cavaliers. Well,
it followed from, I actually got involved with professional sports in the mid-'70s. My brother and I did with a professional hockey team, which led to our merging that with another professional hockey team. But while we were in Cleveland to begin with that team, the building there wanted us to stay, and we did for another year to really try it and see if we couldn't make it in that building. And they gave us an interest in the building. So by 1981, though we were no longer we no longer had a hockey team there. We had the Minnesota North Stars then in the Twin Cities. The owner of the building, a bank, turned around and sold us the balance of it. And we owned this major arena or facility called the Coliseum between Cleveland and Akron. And the major tenant of it was the Cleveland Cavaliers. And in '83, they came on very hard times. And they were either going to move or go bankrupt. So we stepped up and acquired them. And so that's how we got them in the first place in 1983. And so owned them, and through 2005, 22 years, drafted LeBron James a couple of years before we sold the team, and had some very good years in the interim. Not some very good ones, some not so good, but that's the way professional sports can go.
Sure. You had, I imagine, an opportunity to get to know LeBron a little bit.
Yes, I did.
What is he like in the locker room? What is he like on the golf course?
Well, bear in mind, when I got to know him, when we drafted him in 2003, after the season, so in the early summer, June of 2003, he just turned 18. He was still finishing up high school at the time of the lottery, and then just as the draft started. So very young, but very mature for that age, and really a very intelligent person that had good instincts and good judgment. You could tell that right away. He's grown a huge amount since. I can hear it when he talks now, and certainly you can see it in his play. He's even more of a leader than he was then. He was awfully young, but had all of the capabilities that he's now showing were evident, at least in a young sense then.
Yeah, well, that's great. Great connection to sport history. I mean, one of the all-time greats, and you had an opportunity to work with them, and your whole career has been full of these interesting, exciting connections. So when you say you've had a good life, I'm inclined to believe you.
Well, I very much have. I hope I'm going to have a lot more of it, but up to this point, it's been tremendous.
Yes, you're still a young man.
I'd like to think that. Thank you, Devin. Thank you.
So, Gordon, you've become a role model to two generations of people in the fight against blindness. Who do you look up to as a role model? Who inspires you?
Well, I would have to say without question to begin with my wife, and she's been phenomenal. When we were married, now just more than 50 years ago, so 4 or 5 years before I lost my sight completely, it wasn't part of the bargain. Not that she wasn't willing to accept it any way it was, as was I, but she's just been terrific. She hasn't let it get either of us down. She's got a great sense of humor and wonderful forward-looking person. And in her own right, I admire her she's had, as we all do, some health difficulties and done amazingly well with those. So I'd start with her. Another person, just as we all have mentors and we all have people who influence us a lot during our lifetimes. When I mentioned earlier, when I was losing my sight rapidly, we went to various doctors to see if we couldn't find somebody who had an answer. And one of the last people we went to in the fall of 1970, so by that time, my sight was really very narrow. It was like looking through a straw, or maybe it's something a little bit bigger, but that kind of tunnel vision, no periphery to speak of, and during the day as well as at night. So at night it was gone, but during the day I had at least this tunnel of vision, but that was it. And we took a train down to Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. We were told there was an ophthalmologist down there who'd been working on a possible treatment. And we got there, and the first thing he did, a fellow named DuPont Gary, is now no longer with us, but he looked at my eyes to begin with and diagnosed it just as others had. And then I asked him, well, how is your research doing? And he kind of, his shoulders slumped, and he said, I'm sorry to have to tell you, I hit a dead end with it. And my shoulders slumped because I was pretty distraught. Understanding then this was the last chance, certainly in the United States, for anything that could stop the further progress of my problem. And I said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what this is going to be like. I don't know if I can function well, how I'll function. so on. And he said, well, that's funny because one of my patients just up the street from here has been extremely successful, and he lost his sight some 25 years ago to the same disease you have. And he's gone ahead and built this major regional investment bank, Wheat First Securities it was called. His name was Jim Wheat. And he said, and he's a financial advisor to the governor, and he's tremendously philanthropic. He does all these things. And he said, you know what I'll do? He's on the board of the New York Stock Exchange. So if he's up your way near Princeton one of these days for a New York Stock Exchange meeting, I'll have him give you a call. And I left with Luli, my wife, and we stopped at the nearest payphone. That sort of dates the time because there were payphones in various places along the street. And I actually called his office because we were there, and I just didn't want to wait. And we got through to his assistant, and she very kindly took my name and why I was calling and the doctor and so on. And she said, just a minute, and came back and said, he'll see you now, but he's got a lot of things going on. So you come on up. You can sit in his office, and when he gets time in between, he'll talk to you. Well, we went out and sat on a couch. It was the tallest building in the city at that time, and he was on the top floor with the best view in the city, and he couldn't see it, but everybody else really loved it, and he went ahead with several. He talked to the governor 2 or 3 times. We stayed there for 2.5, 3 hours, and he was doing trades. He was putting together syndicates. He was doing mergers. He was talking to the governor. He was involved with all kinds of things, all of which I had a sense of. I didn't do them all, but I knew the language well enough, the jargon, because I was in the venture capital business and had been a commercial lending officer. Before that, I understood the magnitude of what he was doing, all with his head, talking with people, getting advice, going back and forth with the governor and so on. And I walked out of there at the end of the day just on the ceiling. I was so excited to see how well he could function and do things. And he became a good friend, and we kept in touch. He's passed away as well, 15 years ago or so. But always over the years, had a huge impact on me, and I really admired him.
Wow, what a great story. What a great connection. Thank you for sharing that. Gordon, we have just a minute before we go. I want to ask you one last question, and that is if you, we ask all of our guests for an impact hack, some tip that would help us to do more good in the world. You've certainly done a lot of good. What's your impact hack?
Well, with the Foundation Fighting Blindness, why it has reached the point of success it has is because we're constantly trying to understand the problem better and to fill the gaps of research, to find out how we can move faster and faster towards an array of clinical trials that can be successful. Well, what does this mean? It means really doing what I call constructive imagining. So thinking about what might the impediments to doing that be, and how can you solve them, and really preparing. There's no substitute for other people, and for having good people around you, and for having the advice and judgment of other people. I depend on that greatly, and I find it very important. Instead of trying to do anything by myself, I find I'm much more successful when I work as part of a team, and a team where there's mutual respect and strong positive feeling, and where people understand that they have that they're empowered to say and voice what they think. So those things are important. And what I meant by constructive imagining is, as a team, to think about, well, what is likely to happen if we do this? What will happen if we do that? Thinking it through, and then really preparing yourself individually. For me, preparation and hard work are huge. They're keys. They've been keys to everything I've been able to do. You have to work harder when you don't see. You have to find workarounds to the real limitations of blindness. And then you have to prepare for the unexpected, which sighted people don't have to deal with. So it's those things that I would say are the things that have had the most to do with any success I've had.
No. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. It's a great impact hack. And I plan to go apply that constructive imagining today. So
good.
thank you.
It's a very useful tool.
Now, before you go, please tell us again how people can learn more about the Foundation's work and how they can connect with you.
Well, our Twitter feed is at Fight Blindness. The Foundation's website is fightblindness.org. And there is an 800 number, 800-683-5555, 800-683-5555. And we'd be very happy to talk to anybody further about what we're doing. And certainly if you'd like to get involved as a volunteer or in any way, we'd like to have you.
Well, thank you. Gordon, again, thank you very much for taking the time you have today. And we wish you every success in restoring sight to the blind.
Well, thank you very much. You do a great job. Thanks, Devin.
All righty. Let's do some good.
Great.